Hey, amazing people. We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening aren't subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 20,000 subscribers, so please be a legend and smash the subscribe button. And like this video, it will really help support us. Thank you so much.
I never expected my breakup with Jake to lead to this nightmare. We'd been together for 2 years, but things had gotten rocky in the last few months. Constant arguing, trust issues, the works. When we finally called it quits, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. A few weeks after the breakup, I heard through our mutual friend Sarah that Jake had already started dating someone new. Her name was Megan. At first, I was hurt he'd moved on so quickly, but mostly I felt glad he was out of my life. I focused on healing and moving forward. About a month later, I got a strange message on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture showed a woman with long, dark hair, but the account was private. The message accused me of still being involved with Jake and trying to mess his new relationship. I was confused and a little freaked out, but I ignored it. A few days later, another message came through. This time it was more aggressive, calling me names and telling me to stay away from Jake. I realized it must be Megan sending these. I blocked the account, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. New accounts kept popping up, sending similar hateful messages. Some included details about my life that only Jake would know. I started to piece together that he must be feeding Megan information and lies about me, manipulating her into this harassment campaign. Things escalated quickly from there. I started getting calls from unknown numbers at all hours. When I'd answer, there would just be heavy breathing or muffled voices on the other end. My email inbox was flooded with threatening messages. Someone keyed my car in the grocery store parking lot. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep, constantly on edge waiting for the next message or call. I considered changing my number and deleting all my social media, but I didn't want to let them win by forcing me into isolation. One morning, I arrived at my office to find dozens of printouts of old photos of Jake and be plastered all over the building. My coworkers gave me strange looks as I frantically tore them down. I was mortified and furious. This had gone way too far. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence of who was behind it. They advised me to document everything and come back if I got any direct threats. I felt utterly helpless. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom window shattering. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone to call 911. As I dialed, I heard footsteps crunching on the broken glass. A flashlight beam swept across my room. I scrambled out of bed and locked myself in the bathroom, whispering my address to the 911 operator. I could hear multiple voices in my bedroom now. One was definitely Jake's. The other sounded like a woman, Megan, I assumed. They were rifling through my things, Jake egging Megan on to destroy my stuff. I cowered in the bathtub, praying the police would arrive soon. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I heard sirens approaching. Jake and Megan must have heard them too because I heard them rush out of the house. By the time the police arrived, they were long gone. The next few weeks were a blur of police reports, restraining orders, and paranoia. I stayed with my parents for a while, too scared to be alone in my house. I installed security cameras and changed all my locks. Slowly, the harassment died down. I guess the police involvement scared Jake and Megan off, but the damage was done. I still flinch every time my phone buzzes with a notification. I'm always looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them lurking nearby. It's been 6 months now, and things are mostly back to normal. But I don't think I'll ever fully shake the fear and violation I felt during those terrible weeks. I've learned the hard way how quickly a bad breakup can spiral into something truly nightmarish. I thought the nightmare was over, but I was wrong. Just last week, I spotted a familiar car parked down the street from my new apartment. My heart raced as I ducked behind a tree, peering out to confirm my suspicions. There was no mistaking Jake's beat-up Corolla. I rushed inside, double-checking all locks. As I paced my living room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss me. My hands shook as I dialed my best friend, Lisa. She answered on the first ring, sensing the panic in my voice. As I spilled out what was happening, she didn't hesitate. Pack a bag, she said firmly. You're staying with me until we figure this out. An hour later, I was in Lisa's guest room, feeling safer but still on edge. We spent the evening making calls, to the police, to my lawyer, to a private investigator Lisa knew. It felt good to take action, to fight back. As we brainstormed our next moves, a plan started to form. Maybe, just maybe, we could turn the tables on Jake and Megan, use our own tactics against them, catch them in the act, and finally put an end to this. I went to bed that night with a mix of fear and determination. Whatever Jake and Megan had planned, they had no idea what they were in for. This time, I wasn't going to be the victim. This time, I was ready to fight. I never thought I'd be in this mess. When Sarah and I split up, it seemed okay at first. We had our rough moments, but things settled down after a few weeks. I was starting to feel normal again. Then came that knock on my door one Saturday morning. 2 cops were there looking all serious. My mind went crazy, thinking something terrible had happened. But what they told me was worse than I could have imagined. Sarah had reported me for stealing her laptop and trashing her car. I was shocked. None of it was true. I hadn't even seen her in weeks. The next few hours were a blur. I let the cops in, answered their questions, and tried to stay calm while inside I was freaking out. I showed them my own laptop and explained I hadn't been near Sarah's place since we broke up. They seemed doubtful about her claims, but they had to check everything out. When they finally left, I felt sick to my stomach. I called my buddy Jake and told him what happened. He couldn't believe it either. He reminded me to write everything down and said I should talk to a lawyer. I hadn't even thought about needing legal help, but Jake made me realize how serious this could get. The next day was even worse. I woke up to a ton of angry messages from friends. Sarah had told them I was harassing her, sending scary texts, and following her around. It was all lies, but some people believed her without asking me. Friends I'd known forever were calling me a creep and telling me to leave Sarah alone. It felt like my world was falling apart. I took Jake's advice and met with a lawyer named Karen. She told me to gather any proof I could to show I was innocent. Texts, emails, receipts, anything that could prove where I was when Sarah said I was bugging her. I spent hours going through old messages, which was tough, but I knew I had to do it. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my boss called. Someone had sent an anonymous email to my work, saying I was stealing from the company. I knew it had to be Sarah, but I couldn't prove it. My boss said they'd look into it before doing anything, but I could tell he was worried. I felt like everyone at work was watching me, wondering if it was true. A week later, I came home to find my apartment a mess. At first, I thought I'd been robbed, but nothing was missing. It was like someone had been searching for something. I called the cops, but since nothing was stolen, there was no forced entry. They couldn't do much. I was sure it was Sarah. She must have kept a key from when we were together. As time went on, I started seeing Sarah everywhere, or at least I thought I did. I'd see someone who looked like her at the store or think I saw her car, but then it would be gone. I couldn't tell if she was really there or if I was just paranoid. It was scary not knowing what was real anymore. A lawyer said I should get a restraining order, but I was afraid it might make Sarah even angrier. I felt stuck, not knowing what to do and worried that anything I did would make things worse. The last straw was when my sister called me crying. Sarah had told her I had a drug problem and needed help. She said I was acting crazy and might hurt myself or someone else. It took me forever to convince my sister it wasn't true. The fact that Sarah would drag my family into this made me realize how far she'd go for revenge. I finally filed for the restraining order that day. It felt good to do something to protect myself, but I knew it might not stop Sarah if she was really determined. I put up security cameras, changed all my locks, and started writing down every weird thing that happened, no matter how small. Things seemed to calm down after a while. The cops dropped their investigation, finding no proof of Sarah's claims. My boss stopped looking at me weird, and some friends apologized for believing Sarah's lies. But I still couldn't relax. I think I saw Sarah's car following me. Then it would turn off suddenly. I'd get a bunch of weird emails with creepy messages or pictures. I couldn't prove it was Sarah, but I knew it was her. I'm still living on edge, never knowing what she might do next. It's crazy how someone I used to care about could turn into this person who wants to destroy my life. I'm trying to move on, but it's hard when I'm always looking over my shoulder. I've learned a lot from this nightmare. I'm more careful about who I trust now. I keep records of everything, just in case. I found out who my real friends are, the ones who stuck by me when things got tough. I don't know when or if this will ever really be over. Sarah seems to have an endless supply of ways to mess with my life, but I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep fighting to clear my name and get my life back. It's not easy, but I'm stronger than I thought I was. I just hope that someday Sarah will move on and leave me alone. Until then, I'll keep doing my best to stay strong and not let her win. I never thought I'd be in this situation. It's been a few months since Pen and I broke up, and I was just starting to feel like myself again. Then, out of nowhere, she texted me saying we needed to talk urgently. I agreed to meet her at a local coffee shop, thinking maybe she wanted closure or to return some of my stuff. When I got there, Pen looked nervous and fidgety. She hesitated for a moment before dropping the bombshell. She was pregnant, and I was apparently the father. My mind went blank. How could this be possible? We'd always been careful, but as the initial shock wore off, I felt a weird mix of panic and excitement. Was I ready to be a dad? Pen said she wanted to keep it and raise a baby together. Even though we weren't a couple anymore, I told her I'd support her decision and be there for our child. At first, I believed everything Pen told me. I started going with her to doctor's appointments and reading up on pregnancy and parenting. I even told my family and close friends about the baby. Everyone was surprised, but mostly supportive. Pen and I were spending a lot of time together again, almost like we were back together. Part of me wondered if this pregnancy could reunite us. But after a few weeks, things started to feel off. Pen would get defensive when I asked about ultrasound pictures or test results. She always had an excuse for why I couldn't come to her prenatal checkups. When I offered to help her set up appointments, she'd insist she already had it handled. Her stories about morning sickness and craving seemed inconsistent. Some days she'd complain about terrible nausea, but then I'd see her posts on social media of big meals out with friends. I started to have doubts, but I pushed them aside. I didn't want to accuse Pen of lying about something so serious. Maybe she was just nervous about the pregnancy and acting strangely because of that. I tried to be patient and give her space. Things came to a head when Pen said she was about 4 months along. I realized I hadn't seen any real proof of the pregnancy yet. No ultrasound photos, no baby bump, nothing from a doctor. When I gently asked her about it, she flew into a rage. She accused me of not trusting her and not wanting the baby. I was taken aback by her extreme reaction. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I started paying more attention and noticing all the inconsistencies. Pen's timeline for the pregnancy kept changing. She'd say she was 16 weeks along one day, then 14 weeks the next. When I'd bring up anything related to preparing for the baby, like looking at cribs or discussing names, she'd quickly change the subject. She never wanted to talk about practical matters like health insurance or birth plans. The final straw came when I ran into Pen's roommate at the grocery store. I casually mentioned the pregnancy, and her roommate looked totally confused. She had no idea Pen was supposedly pregnant. That's when I knew for sure Pen had been lying this whole time. There was no baby. I was stunned and angry when the truth sank in. Why would Pen make up such an enormous lie? I confronted her about it, and she finally admitted there was no pregnancy. She said she missed me and thought a baby would bring us back together. She begged me not to leave her again. I was furious and hurt. I told Pen I never wanted to see or speak to her again. But the damage was already done. For months, I've been telling people I was going to be a father. Now I could go back and explain to everyone that it was all a lie. Some people didn't believe me at first. They thought I was the one making excuses to get out of my responsibilities. It took a while to convince them of the truth. The whole ordeal put a strain on some of my relationships. My parents were disappointed that I'd let myself get manipulated like that. Some friends thought I should have known better. I felt embarrassed and stupid for falling for Pen's lies. I started to question my own judgment. Could I trust my instincts about people anymore? It's been a few months since everything came out, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. I've had to block Pen on everything because she won't stop trying to contact me. I'm working on rebuilding trust with the people in my life. Some days are harder than others. I still get angry when I think about how Pen used me and lied to everyone, but I'm trying to move forward and learn from this experience. If there's one good thing that came out of this mess, it's that I've learned to trust my gut more. Looking back, there were so many red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe Pen. Now I know to pay attention when something doesn't feel right. I'm more cautious about who I let into my life. It's not easy to open up again after being hurt like that, but I'm hopeful that one day I'll be able to trust someone fully again. For now, I'm focusing on healing and surrounding myself with honest people who truly care about me. It started with a phone call I never expected. Kelly's number flashed on my screen, and against my better judgment, I answered. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since our messy breakup. Her voice sounded small and scared on the other end of the line. She told me she was in trouble, lost her job, couldn't make rent, and was facing eviction. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but hearing the desperation in her voice tugged at my heartstrings. Before I knew it, I was offering to help her out with some cash to tide her over. We met at a cafe to exchange the money. Kelly looked rough, dark circles under her eyes, clothes wrinkled and disheveled. She tearfully thanked me, promising to pay me back soon. I told her it was no problem, just glad I could help an old friend. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, Kelly called again. Her car had broken down and she couldn't afford repairs. She needed rides to job interviews. Could I help out just for a little while? Against my better judgment, I agreed. I started picking her up in the mornings, driving her around town for errands and some post-interviews. She was always grateful, touching my arm and telling me what a good friend I was. But as the days went by, I started to feel uneasy. Kelly never seemed to actually go into any of the places she claimed to have interviews. She'd ask me to wait in the car, then come back 10 minutes later saying it was canceled or rescheduled. When I tried to ask about her job search progress, she quickly changed the subject. She started inviting herself over to my place more often, saying her apartment was too depressing. Before I knew it, she was staying over most nights, slowly moving her things in. I realized I was being manipulated, but every time I tried to create some distance, Kelly would have a new crisis. She'd call me in tears, saying she was having panic attacks and didn't know who else to turn to, or she claimed someone was following her and she didn't feel safe alone. Each time, I'd cave and rush to her aid. Kelly knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel guilty for abandoning her. She'd remind me of all the good times we had together, hinting that maybe we should give our relationship another shot. But I knew deep down that this wasn't healthy. Kelly hadn't really changed. She was still the same unstable, manipulative person who'd made our relationship so toxic before. She was just better at hiding it now, playing the damsel in distress. I tried to set boundaries, telling Kelly she needed to find her own place and get back on her feet. She'd agree at first, but then nothing would change. If I pushed harder, she'd have a meltdown, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. The final straw came when I got home from work one day to find Kelly had let herself into my apartment. She'd used the spare key I'd forgotten she still had. Not only that, but she'd invited a bunch of her friends over for a party. My place was trash, with empty bottles and cigarette butts everywhere. Kelly was passed out drunk on the couch, and I woke her up, furious. She acted like it was no big deal. She said she just wanted to surprise me and cheer me up after a long work week. That's when I knew I had to cut ties completely, no matter how guilty she tried to make me feel. I changed my locks, blocked her number, and told mutual friends not to pass any messages along. For weeks, Kelly tried everything to get back in contact. She sent pleading emails, left voicemails from unknown numbers, even showed up at my workplace once. Each time I stood firm and refused to engage. Eventually, the attempts slowed down and stopped. I heard through the grapevine that Kelly had moved to another city for a fresh start. Part of me felt guilty, wondering if I should have done more to help her, but I knew I'd made the right choice for my own well-being. It took time to process everything that had happened. I felt angry at Kelly for manipulating me, but also angry at myself for falling for it. I realized I needed to work on my own issues with setting boundaries and people-pleasing tendencies. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I missed along the way. Kelly's constant crises always seemed to happen right when I was pulling away. Her sob stories were dramatic but vague on details. She was all talk about getting her life together, but never took concrete action. The experience taught me a lot about toxic relationships and how easily they can creep back into your life if you're not vigilant. I learned that it's okay to have compassion for someone, but not at the expense of your own mental health and boundaries. These days, I'm much more cautious about who I let into my life. I've gotten better at trusting my gut when something feels off. And most importantly, I've learned that real friends don't use guilt and manipulation to get what they want. Sometimes I still think about Kelly and hope she's gotten the help she needs. But I no longer feel responsible for saving her. I can look back on that chapter of my life with the knowledge that I did my best in a difficult situation, and ultimately made the right choice for myself. It all started when Ajay and I broke up after 2 years together. The split was messy with lots of arguing and hurt feelings on both sides. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags, but love has a way of blinding you. After Ajay moved out, I tried to move on with my life. I threw myself into work and spent time with friends, doing my best to forget about him. For a while, things seemed okay. I was starting to feel like myself again. Then one day, about 3 months after the breakup, I noticed something odd. I was cleaning my apartment when I spotted a tiny black object tucked into the slats of an air vent. At first, I thought it was just a piece of rubbish. But when I took a closer look, my blood ran cold. It was a small camera, no bigger than a button. My hands shook as I pried it out of the vent. How long had it been there? Who put it there? Deep down, I already knew the answer, but I didn't want to believe it. I spent the next few hours tearing my apartment apart, searching every nook and cranny. To my horror, I found 2 more cameras, one hidden in a potted plant Jay had given me, and another tucked behind a framed photo on my bookshelf. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Ajay had been spying on me. For how long, I had no idea. Weeks. Months. The thought made me physically ill. I sat on my couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of my belongings, trying to process what was happening. How much had he seen? Had he been watching me sleep, shower, change clothes? The invasion of privacy was overwhelming. My mind raced, thinking of all the private moments that might not have been so private after all. Phone calls with friends where I vented about the breakup. Crying sessions alone in my room, even intimate moments with the guy I'd started seeing recently. Had Ajay seen it all? I felt dirty, violated, and scared. This was the kind of thing you see in movies or read about online, not something that happens in real life. Except it was happening to me. I called my best friend in a panic, and she came over right away. Together we did another sweep of the apartment, but didn't find any more cameras. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we might have missed something. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow, every tiny noise had me on edge. I kept imagining Ajay outside, watching me through the windows. It was paranoia, but after what I discovered, could I really be blamed? The next day, I went to the police. It took my report and the cameras as evidence, but warned me it might be hard to prove Ajay was behind it without catching him in the act. They advised me to change my locks and be vigilant. I did more than that. I moved out of that apartment as soon as I could, leaving behind the furniture Ajay had given me. I changed my phone number, email address, and even deleted my social media accounts. It felt extreme, but I needed to feel safe again. For weeks, I jumped at every unexpected noise. I checked for cameras everywhere I went, in hotel rooms, at friends' houses, even in public restrooms. The paranoia was exhausting, but I couldn't help it. Slowly, I started to piece my life back together. I saw a therapist to help process the trauma. I learned about cybersecurity and how to protect myself online. I even joined a support group for victims of stalking and found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. As time passed, the constant fear began to fade. I started to feel more like myself again. But the experience changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I learned to trust my instincts and to speak up when something felt off. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed with Ajay. The jealousy, the need for control, the lack of respect for boundaries. I know now that those aren't signs of love, but of something much darker. I still have moments where I wonder if I'm truly free of Ajay's surveillance. Sometimes I catch myself scanning rooms for hidden cameras or feeling uneasy in new places, but I refuse to let fear control my life. Instead, I focus on the present and the future I'm building for myself. I'm stronger now, wiser. And while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I've learned valuable lessons about self-respect, boundaries, and the importance of trusting your gut. To anyone out there who might be going through something similar, know that you're not alone. It's okay to be scared, but don't let that fear stop you from seeking help and reclaiming your life. There's light at the end of the tunnel, even if you can't see it yet. As for Ajay, I hope he gets the help he clearly needs. But more than that, I hope he stays far, far away from me and anyone else he might try to victimize. Because now I know the signs, and I won't be fooled again. Today, I'm living in a new city with new friends and a new outlook on life. I'm cautious, yes, but I'm also hopeful. Because while my ex may have taken my sense of security for a while, he didn't take my spirit. And that's something no hidden camera can ever capture. I never thought it would come to this. When I broke up with Rachel, I figured that would be the end of it. Sure, there were tears and angry words, but that's normal, right? I blocked her number and social media accounts, hoping to make a clean break and move on with my life. For a while, it seemed to work. I focused on my job, hung out with friends, and even started thinking about dating again. Then came that Friday evening. I remember it clearly. I had a long week at work and was looking forward to relaxing at home. As soon as I opened my apartment door, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different, heavy with a familiar perfume scent that didn't belong there anymore. Stepping inside, my heart sank. My living room was trashed. The coffee table was overturned. Books and papers strewn across the floor. Picture frames lay shattered, glass crunching under my feet as I moved further into the apartment. In the kitchen, dishes were smashed in the sink and on the counters. Food had been pulled from the fridge and cabinets, tossed around in a destructive frenzy. But it was my bedroom that really drove home the horror of the situation. My clothes were scattered everywhere, drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor. The mattress was half off the bed frame, sheets tangled and torn. And there, in the middle of the chaos, was a pile of items that didn't belong to me. Rachel's favorite sweater. Photos of us together that I thought I'd deleted. A necklace I'd given her for our anniversary. These weren't just randomly left behind. They were placed deliberately, a clear message that she had been here and wasn't done with me. I felt sick to my stomach. How had she gotten in? I changed the locks after we broke up, just to be safe. Had she had a spare key I didn't know about, or had she found another way in? The thought of her violating my personal space like this made me feel violated and unsafe in my own home. I called the police, of course. They came and took photos, dusted for fingerprints, and filed a report. But they didn't seem overly concerned. Ex-girlfriend trouble, one officer said with a shrug. It happens. Change your locks again and let us know if anything else happens. But I knew it wouldn't end there. This wasn't just a moment of anger or impulsive act. The level of destruction, the carefully placed personal items, this was calculated. Rachel was sending a message, and that message was clear. She wasn't going to let me move on. I spent that night at a friend's place, too shaken to stay in my trash apartment. The next day, I started cleaning up the mess. Every broken dish, every torn piece of clothing felt like a reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I kept finding little gifts from Rachel as I cleaned. A lipstick-stained coffee mug hidden behind the TV, one of her hair ties tucked into my pillowcase. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to get my life back to normal. I changed the locks again, installed a security system, and even considered moving. But Rachel's presence lingered. I'd catch glimpses of her on the street, always too far away to confront. My tires were slashed one night. Anonymous, threatening emails started showing up in my inbox. The police weren't much help, without concrete proof that Rachel was behind everything. They said there wasn't much they could do. I felt like I was going crazy, jumping at every sound and suspicious of everyone around me. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up at 3 a.m. to find Rachel standing at the foot of my bed, just watching me sleep. I don't know how long she'd been there or how she'd gotten in. In that moment, seeing her shadowy figure in the darkness, all the fear and anger of the past weeks came crashing down on me. I wish I could say I handled it well, that I calmly called the police or reasoned with her. But the truth is, I panicked. I yelled, I threatened, I probably scared her as much as she scared me. She ran out before I could stop her, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her perfume and a deep, unsettling fear that this was far from over. Now, as I write this, I'm staying with my parents in another state. I've taken a leave of absence from work, and I'm looking into restraining orders and other legal options. But I can't shake the feeling that Rachel is still out there, watching and waiting. Every phone call from an unknown number, every unexpected knock at the door sends my heart racing. I don't know what Rachel's endgame is. Does she want to get back together? Does she just want to punish me for breaking up with her? Or is there something darker driving her actions? All I know is that my life has been turned upside down, and I'm not sure if I'll ever feel truly safe again. So here I am trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wants to confront Rachel to try and understand why she's doing this and what it will take to make her stop. Another part just wants to disappear, to start over somewhere she can't find me. But deep down, I know that running away won't solve anything. Whatever happens next, I'll have to face it head on. I just hope I'm strong enough to handle whatever Rachel has planned. We'd been together for 2 years and things just weren't working out. I tried to end it gently, but she didn't take it well. At first, I figured she just needed time to process. Boy, was I wrong. A week after the breakup, I got served with papers. Brenda had filed for a restraining order against me. I was stunned. The allegations were completely false. She claimed I was stalking her, sending threatening messages, and showing up at her workplace. None of it was true. I hadn't even contacted her since we broke up. Suddenly, I found myself in a legal nightmare. I had to appear in court to defend myself against these bogus charges. My stomach was in knots as I sat there, listening to Brenda tearfully recount made-up stories of how I was terrorizing her. She played the victim perfectly, and I could see the judge's sympathetic looks. It made me sick. My lawyer did his best to poke holes in her story, but without hard evidence to disprove her claims. It was my word against hers. To my horror, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. I was ordered to stay away from Brenda's home and workplace and have no contact with her. Just like that, I became the bad guy. Friends who heard about the restraining order looked at me differently. Whispers followed me at work. I felt like I was living in some twisted alternate reality where I was being punished for something I didn't do. The worst part was Brenda didn't stop there. She started showing up at places she knew I frequented, then calling the police to report that I was violating the order. I had to constantly watch my back, worried that I'd accidentally end up in the same place as her and get arrested. One night, I was grabbing dinner at my favorite restaurant when I spotted Brenda walk in. My heart started racing. I quickly paid my bill and left, praying she hadn't seen me. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, I got a call from the police asking about a reported violation. Luckily, I had kept my receipt and the restaurant staff backed up my story that I left as soon as I saw her. But it was a close call. I lived in constant anxiety, feeling like a criminal in my own life. Brenda was systematically dismantling my reputation and my peace of mind. I lost friends who believed her lies. Dating was out of the question. Who would want to get involved with a guy with a restraining order against him? I felt trapped and alone. My lawyer advised me to start documenting everything. I began keeping a detailed log of my whereabouts, saving receipts and security camera footage when possible to prove where I had been. I also started recording any interactions with Brenda in case she tried to provoke me into violating the order. As the court date for the permanent restraining order hearing approached, I was a nervous wreck. My whole future hinged on convincing the judge that Brenda was lying. My lawyer and I had gathered as much evidence as we could to show inconsistencies in her story and prove that I wasn't the stalker she claimed I was. The day of the hearing arrived. I felt sick as I listened to Brenda weave her web of lies on the stand. But this time, we were prepared. My lawyer methodically dismantled her claims, presenting evidence that showed I was nowhere near her when she claimed I was stalking her. We had timestamps for my credit card purchases, cell phone GPS data, and even security footage showing her following me. The turning point came when my lawyer presented a series of texts Brenda had sent to a friend, bragging about how she was going to make me pay for breaking up with her. The friend had come forward after seeing how Brenda's lies were destroying my life. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as he realized how thoroughly he'd been deceived. Brenda's carefully crafted victim facade crumbled. The judge not only dismissed the restraining order, but also strongly reprimanded Brenda for abusing the legal system. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as I left the courthouse. The nightmare was finally over, but the damage to my life and reputation had already been done. I knew it would take time to rebuild what Brenda had torn down. In the weeks that followed, I focused on healing and moving forward. I was grateful for the friends and family who had stood by me through the ordeal. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. The experience left me warier, but also more appreciative of the truth and those who stand for it. I learned the hard way how easily someone's life can be upended by false accusations. It made me more determined than ever to live with integrity and stand up for what's right. I can see the red flags I missed with Brenda. Her jealousy, her need for control. They were always there, I just didn't want to see them. I know how to trust my instincts and not ignore those warning signs. Sometimes I still have moments of anxiety, worried that Brenda might try something else. But I remind myself that the truth came out in the end. I won't let her actions define my life anymore. I'm moving forward, focusing on the good things and the people who truly care about me. It's not easy to trust again after going through something like that, but I'm working on it day by day. I know there are good people out there, and I won't let one person's cruel actions close me off from future relationships. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, It's the importance of surrounding yourself with people who bring out the best in you, not those who manipulate and tear you down. I'm grateful for the second chance I've been given, and I intend to make the most of it. I thought it was over. Jenny and I had split up months ago, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. The constant drama, emotional roller coaster, it was all behind me, or so I believed. That night, I came home late from work, exhausted and ready to crash. As I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. The porch light was flickering, casting eerie shadows across the front of my house. I didn't remember leaving it on. Stepping out of my car, I noticed deep scratches along the driver's side door. My heart sank. This wasn't just random vandalism. The scratches formed a pattern, spelling out "forever yours" in jagged letters. It was one of Jenny's favorite phrases during our relationship. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the front door. Inside, the house was dark and quiet, but I could sense something was wrong. I flicked on the lights and gasped. The living room was a disaster. Photo frames were smashed, their contents torn to shreds. The couch cushions had been slashed open, stuffing spilling out onto the floor. But what caught my eye was a message scrawled across the wall in red lipstick. Jenny's signature shade. "Miss me," it read, followed by a smiley face that looked more sinister than cheerful. I stumbled through the rest of the house, discovering more destruction with each step. In the kitchen, every dish was shattered. The fridge door hung open, its contents spoiled and reeking. On the counter, a half-empty bottle of wine stood next to two glasses, a sick reminder of the romantic evenings we used to share. The bedroom was the worst. Our clothes were strewn everywhere, many of them cut to ribbons. The mattress had been overturned, and the pillows were slashed open. Feathers covered everything like a bizarre snowfall. But it was my laptop that really drove home the invasion of privacy. It sat open on the desk, the screen cracked but still functioning. As I approached, I saw that Jenny had accessed my personal files. Photos of us together during happier times played in a slideshow, set to our song, the one we danced to at her sister's wedding. I felt sick to my stomach. How had she gotten in? How long had she been here? The questions raced through my mind as I tried to process the scene before me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. There was a new message from an unknown number. "Hope you liked my surprise. XOXO." I knew it was Jenny. She'd always signed her texts that way, a habit I once found endearing but now filled me with dread. I called the police, but I already knew what they'd say. Without concrete proof, there wasn't much they could do. They'd file a report, dust for fingerprints, but Jenny was too smart to leave any real evidence behind. As I waited for the officers to arrive, I paced through the wreckage of my home, trying to catalog the damage. It wasn't just the physical destruction that shook me. It was the violation of my personal space, the intrusion into my life that I thought I'd left behind. Every object seemed to hold a memory, twisted by Jenny's actions. The shredded concert tickets on the floor reminded me of our first date. The broken picture frames contained snapshots of vacations and family gatherings. Even the wine bottle was from a vineyard we'd visited together. The police came and went, leaving me with a case number and a sense of helplessness. They advised me to change my locks, install security cameras, and document any further incidents. It all seemed so inadequate in the face of Jenny's determination. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept checking my phone, half expecting more messages from Jenny. My mind raced with possibilities. What if she came back? What if this was just the beginning? The next few days were a blur of cleanup and damage control. I had to explain the situation to my boss, who was surprisingly understanding about my need to take some time off. Friends offered help and support, but I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. I changed my locks, installed an alarm system, and even considered moving. But part of me knew that wouldn't stop Jenny. She'd found a way in once, she could do it again. The worst part was the constant looking over my shoulder. Every time I left the house, I scanned the street for unfamiliar cars. At work, I jumped at every unexpected noise. Even grocery shopping became an exercise in paranoia. Was that Jenny I glimpsed at the end of the aisle, or just my imagination? A week after the incident, I received a package at my office. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a framed photo of Jenny and me, taken during a beach vacation years ago. We looked happy, carefree. On the back she'd written, "Remember the good times. We can have them again." I wanted to throw the photo away, but something stopped me. It was evidence, I told myself. Proof of her continued harassment. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Despite everything, a small part of me still cared for the person Jenny used to be before the jealousy and possessiveness took over. As the days turned into weeks, the overt signs of Jenny's presence faded. No more vandalism, no more cryptic messages. But the fear lingered. I found myself analyzing every interaction, wondering if the new barista at my local coffee shop was really just being friendly or if Jenny had somehow put her up to it. My friends tried to help me move on, setting me up on dates and inviting me to social events. But I struggled to connect with anyone new. How could I explain the constant tension I lived with? How could I trust someone else when I couldn't even feel safe in my own home? Sometimes late at night, I catch myself wondering what Jenny was doing. Was she planning her next move? Had she found someone new to obsess over? Or was she out there watching and waiting, ready to insert herself back into my life at any moment? I knew I couldn't live like this forever. The constant fear and paranoia were taking their toll, but I also knew that as long as Jenny was out there, unpredictable and unhinged, I'd never truly be free. All I could do was stay vigilant, hope for the best, and try to reclaim some semblance of a normal life, always with one eye looking over my shoulder, just in case. It all started after Dylan and I broke up. Things had been rocky for a while, but the final split was still painful. I was a mess for weeks, barely leaving my apartment except to drag myself to work. That's when Will reached out. Will had always been a good friend to both of us. He texted check-in, offering a sympathetic ear. At first, I was hesitant to open up. Will was persistent, inviting me out for coffee to talk. Sitting across from Will at the cafe, the floodgates opened. I poured out all my hurt and anger, rehashing arguments and airing out every frustration I'd bottled up. Will listened patiently, nodding along. It felt good to finally voice everything I'd been holding in. After that first meetup, Will and I started hanging out more. We'd grab drinks after work or meet up on weekends. I found myself constantly venting about Dylan, sharing details of our relationship I'd never told anyone before. Will always seemed eager to listen, encouraging me to keep talking. A few weeks went by like this. I was starting to feel a bit better, less consumed by the breakup. But then odd things began happening. One day, I got a text from Dylan mentioning an embarrassing story from my childhood, something I'd only ever told Will about over drinks the week before. I brushed it off as coincidence at first. But similar incidents kept occurring. Dylan would reference inside jokes or intimate details that I knew for a fact I'd never shared during our relationship. It was unsettling, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was happening. Things escalated when I arrived home one evening to find my apartment in disarray. Nothing was stolen, but it was clear someone had been through my things. My first thought was Dylan, but how could he have gotten in? Shaken, I called Will. He rushed over, comforting me and helping clean up the mess. As we sorted through scattered papers, Will casually mentioned that Dylan had been acting strangely lately, showing up at places he knew I frequented. A chill ran down my spine. I'd never told Will about Dylan's recent behavior. How did he know? That's when pieces started falling into place. All the times Will had pressed for more details about my relationship. His constant questions about my schedule and whereabouts. The eager way he'd encourage me to badmouth Dylan. Heart pounding, I made an excuse and asked Will to leave. As soon as he was gone, I started digging. I combed through old texts and emails, noting patterns I'd missed before. Will always seemed to contact me right after I'd been somewhere Dylan might have seen me. He often brought up topics that would prompt me to reveal personal information. I felt sick as the truth sunk in. Will had been playing both sides this whole time. He'd been feeding everything back to Dylan, letting him manipulate the situation from afar. My mind raced, remembering all the private things I'd told Will. Every secret, every vulnerability. Dylan now knew it all. The violation felt enormous. I didn't confront Will right away. I needed proof first. So I started laying traps, feeding in false information to see what would make its way back to Dylan. Sure enough, within days, Dylan was throwing my lies back in my face via angry texts. The betrayal stung deep. I trusted Will, seen him as a lifeline during one of my lowest points. All along, he'd been nothing more than Dylan's puppet. I cut off contact with both of them immediately. Changed my locks, blocked their numbers, deleted them on social media. But the damage was done. I felt exposed, raw, unable to trust my own judgment. For weeks, I jumped at every sound, convinced Dylan was lurking around every corner. My friends tried to help, but I was wary of letting anyone get close. The whole experience left me paranoid and withdrawn. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I focused on work, picked up new hobbies, anything to keep my mind occupied. I was hyper-vigilant about what I shared and who I shared it with. Months passed. The worst of the anxiety faded, but I still found myself looking over my shoulder. I'd spot someone who looked like Dylan on the street and my heart would race. A text from an unknown number would send me into a panic. I never got a full explanation from either of them. Part of me wanted to confront them, to understand why they'd done this, but I knew engaging would only give them more power. The healthiest thing was to move on. It's been over a year now. I'd like to say I'm completely over it, but the experience changed me. I'm more guarded, slower to open up, but I'm also stronger. I've learned to trust my instincts, to value my privacy, to be selective about who I let into my life. Sometimes I still wonder what motivated them. Was it just Dylan unable to let go? Was Will getting something out of it too? In the end, I realized it didn't matter. Their reasons couldn't justify what they'd done. These days, I'm focused on moving forward. I'm dating again cautiously. I've made new friends, ones who've proven themselves trustworthy. The fear is fading, replaced by a quiet determination to not let one bad experience define me. I'll probably always be a bit wary of exes and overly helpful friends, but I refuse to let Dylan and Will's betrayal keep me from living my life. They took advantage of me at my most vulnerable, but they don't get to dictate my future. I'm reclaiming my story, one day at a time. I never thought I'd be in this situation. Jason and I had been together for 2 years before things went south. The breakup was messy, lots of yelling and accusations thrown around. I just wanted it to be over and move on with my life. But Jason had other plans. A few days after we split, I got a text from him. At first I ignored it, not wanting to reopen old wounds. But then more messages started coming in. That's when I saw the photo. It was from a private moment we'd shared months ago. I felt sick to my stomach seeing it pop up on my phone like that. Jason threatened to send it to my friends and family if I didn't agree to talk to him. I was shocked he would stoop so low. Part of me wanted to call his bluff, but the thought of those images getting out terrified me, so I reluctantly agreed to meet up. When we got together, Jason acted like nothing was wrong. He tried to convince me to get back together, saying he'd delete the photos if I gave him another chance. I refused and left as quickly as I could. That's when things escalated. Jason started sending screenshots of our private photos to mutual friends, asking what they thought. A couple people reached out to check if I was okay. I was mortified. I tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal. Then my mom called, saying she'd gotten a strange email with some photos attached. Thankfully, she hadn't opened them, but I knew it had to be from Jason. I broke down and told her what was happening. She was supportive, but I could tell she was disappointed in me. I thought about going to the police, but I was too embarrassed. What if they didn't take it seriously? Or worse, what if the photos somehow got out during an investigation? I felt trapped and didn't know what to do. Jason's demands kept escalating. He said he'd post everything online unless I agreed to see him again. I was terrified of the photos spreading further, so I gave in. We met at a coffee shop and Jason acted like everything was normal. He kept trying to reminisce about our relationship. I just nodded along, waiting for it to be over. This pattern continued for weeks. Jason would threaten to release more photos. I'd agree to see him, and he'd act like nothing was wrong. It was exhausting and taking a huge toll on my mental health. I dreaded checking my phone, worried about what new threat might be waiting. I started withdrawing from friends and family. I was paranoid they'd seen the photos or heard rumors. My work started to suffer as I had trouble focusing. I felt like I was living a double life, trying to act normal while this nightmare played out behind the scenes. Eventually, Jason's threats expanded beyond just releasing the photos. He said he'd start sending them to my coworkers or boss if I didn't do what he wanted. The thought of losing my job over this was terrifying. I felt completely powerless. I hit rock bottom when Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced. Seeing him there made everything feel so much more real and threatening. I had a full-blown panic attack after he left. That's when I knew I couldn't keep living like this. With shaking hands, I called a domestic violence hotline. The woman I spoke to was incredibly kind and helpful. She explained that what Jason was doing was a form of abuse called revenge, and it was illegal in our state. She gave me information on my options and resources for support. Armed with this knowledge, I finally felt strong enough to take action. I documented all of Jason's threats and the photos he'd sent out. Then I went to the police and filed a report. They took it seriously and started building a case against him. I also reached out to friends and family to explain what had been happening. Their support meant everything to me. Knowing I wasn't alone gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. The legal process was long and draining. Jason tried to paint himself as the victim, saying I was making it all up. But the evidence was clear. In the end, he was charged with several crimes related to harassment. The judge granted a restraining order against Jason. Knowing he legally couldn't contact me anymore lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. I finally felt like I could breathe again. Recovery hasn't been easy. I still had anxiety about those photos resurfacing someday. But I'm working through it in therapy and trying to move forward. I've learned a lot about digital privacy and am much more cautious now. The breakup with Megan was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, but I never imagined the nightmare that would follow. Our relationship had been tumultuous from the start, with frequent arguments and emotional outbursts. However, I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, and that we could work through our issues. When I finally mustered the courage to end things, it was like unleashing a torrent of rage and desperation within Megan. Initially, she bombarded me with texts and calls, her messages ranging from heartfelt pleas to bitter insults. Day and night, my phone buzzed with her relentless attempts to draw me back in. I tried to remain firm in my decision, but her persistence was overwhelming. Megan's behavior quickly escalated from annoying to downright alarming. She began showing up unannounced at my workplace, my favorite hangout spots, even my apartment building. Each encounter was punctuated by tears, screaming, and emotional manipulation. She would beg me to reconsider, promising to change, promising that this time would be different. It was a cycle of abuse that left me emotionally drained and constantly on edge. When it became clear that I wouldn't change my mind, Megan's tactics took a sinister turn. She began spreading rumors among our mutual friends, accusing me of being abusive during our relationship. At first, I brushed it off as a desperate attempt to tarnish my reputation, but the accusations only escalated. Megan started posting photos online, showcasing bruises and injuries she claimed I had inflicted upon her. The images were shocking, and I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I knew these photos were fabricated, but she had carefully crafted a narrative that painted her as the victim of my supposed violence. Her stories became increasingly elaborate, with detailed accounts of physical and emotional abuse that never occurred. She even contacted my workplace and family, spinning horrifying lies about our relationship. My boss pulled me aside, expressing concern over the allegations, while my parents called in a panic, demanding answers. Suddenly, I found myself caught in a web of deceit, trying to clear my name while my reputation and personal life spiraled out of control. Friends and acquaintances who had once been close began distancing themselves, unsure of what to believe. The constant barrage of accusations and false claims left me feeling isolated and helpless. Megan's campaign of defamation didn't stop there. She started making anonymous calls, leaving disturbing voicemails filled with threats and insults. I lived in constant fear, never knowing when or how she would strike next. The stress and anxiety took a toll on my mental and physical health, making it difficult to focus on anything else. I remember lying awake at night, my mind racing with thoughts of what Megan might do next. The sound of a notification would send chills down my spine as I braced myself for the latest attack. My once peaceful home had become a prison, a place where I no longer felt safe or secure. Throughout this ordeal, I tried to maintain my composure and handle the situation with grace. I documented every interaction, saved every piece of evidence, and sought legal counsel. However, the damage to my reputation and relationships was already done. Megan's lies had taken root, and convincing others of the truth became an uphill battle. The worst part was the fear and uncertainty that consumed me. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if perhaps there was some truth to Megan's claims that I had somehow missed. The constant gaslighting and manipulation left me feeling trapped, with no clear path forward. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, Megan escalated her campaign to new heights. She created fake social media accounts, using them to harass and intimidate not only me but also my loved ones. My family and closest friends became targets, receiving disturbing messages and threats. I remember the sinking feeling in my gut when my mother called me, her voice trembling as she recounted the vile messages she had received. Megan had stopped at nothing, dragging innocent people into her twisted vendetta against me. The emotional toll was overwhelming, and I found myself struggling to maintain a semblance of normalcy. My work suffered as I found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on tasks, constantly distracted by the latest development in Megan's campaign. My personal relationships strained under the weight of the constant drama and stress. I felt like a prisoner in my own life, trapped by Megan's relentless pursuit of revenge. Even as I write this, the nightmare continues. Megan's determination seems unwavering, and I live in constant fear of what she might do next. Will she escalate her threats into physical violence? Will she find a way to sabotage my career or personal life even further? The uncertainty is maddening. As I sit here, typing these words, I can't help but feel a sense of dread creeping in. Is Megan watching, waiting for her next opportunity to strike? The paranoia is suffocating, and I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, searching for any sign of her presence. Perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is the realization that this nightmare may never end. Megan's vendetta seems to know no bounds, and I fear that she will stop at nothing until she has completely destroyed my life. The thought of living in perpetual fear, constantly bracing for her next attack, is almost too much to bear. When Laura and I broke up, I thought it was a clean split. We'd been dating for a couple of years, but I wasn't ready for the whole marriage and kids thing. She seemed to take it well when I explained my feelings. We hugged, said our goodbyes, and I left her apartment thinking that was the end of it. No drama, no tears, just two adults going their separate ways. I even felt a little proud of how maturely we handled it. A few months passed and life went on as normal. I threw myself into work, hung out with friends, and even went on a few casual dates. Laura and I had agreed to remain friends on social media, but I didn't pay much attention to her posts. That changed one Saturday morning when I was scrolling through my feed and saw something that made me do a double take. It was a photo of Laura and me at a fancy restaurant, all dressed up and smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Celebrating our engagement." I blinked, confused. We hadn't been to any restaurants together since the breakup, let alone gotten engaged. As I looked closer, I realized the image had been photoshopped. Laura had taken an old photo of us and edited it to make it look recent. At first, I thought it was just a weird joke. Maybe she was trying to make an ex jealous or something. I sent her a quick message asking what was up, but she didn't respond. I shrugged it off and went about my day, figuring she'd explain later. But the post didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, Laura shared more and more photoshopped images of us together. There we were on a tropical beach, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, even posing with a just married sign. Each photo was captioned with loving messages about our relationship and future together. I tried reaching out to her again, but she never responded to my messages. It was like she was living in some parallel universe where we were still together and happier than ever. I started to feel uneasy, wondering what was going on in her head. Things took an even stranger turn when my phone started blowing up with congratulatory messages. Confused, I scrolled through my inbox to find dozens of friends and family members wishing me well on my engagement. Apparently, Laura had sent out save the date cards for our wedding. I spent the next few days in damage control mode, explaining to everyone that there had been a misunderstanding and that Laura and I weren't actually together. Most people were understanding, if a bit confused, but a few, especially those who didn't know me well, seemed skeptical. I could tell they thought I was the one acting strange, not Laura. Finally, I decided I had to confront her face to face. I drove to her apartment, rehearsing what I was going to say. I needed to be firm but kind to make her understand that this behavior wasn't okay without pushing her over the edge. When Laura opened the door, she greeted me with a big smile, like nothing was wrong. She invited me in, chattering about wedding plans and how excited she was for our future together. It was surreal, like I'd stepped into the Twilight Zone. I tried to talk to her to remind her that we'd broken up months ago. But every time I brought it up, she changed the subject or looked at me with confusion, insisting that we'd been together this whole time. It was like she'd completely rewritten our history in her mind. As I left her apartment that day, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a joke gone too far. Laura genuinely believed we were still together, and I had no idea how to make her see reality. Over the next few weeks, Laura's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up at my workplace, bringing me lunch and acting like we were the perfect couple. My coworkers gave me strange looks, clearly confused by the situation. I tried to explain, but I could tell some of them thought I was the one being weird, stringing Laura along or playing some kind of game. I started to feel paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and wondering where Laura would pop up next. I changed my routines, avoided my usual hangout spots, and even considered moving to a new apartment. But no matter what I did, she always seemed to find me. The situation came to a head at my best friend's birthday party. I'd been hesitant to go, worried that Laura might show up, but I didn't want to let my friend down. As I walked into the bar, my heart sank. There was Laura, chatting with my friends like she belonged there. Before I could make a quick exit, she spotted me and rushed over, throwing her arms around me and planting a kiss on my cheek. My friends watched, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. I could see the questions in their eyes, wondering why I'd been saying Laura and I weren't together when here she was, acting like my devoted fiancé. I pulled Laura aside, trying one last time to get through to her. I spoke quietly but firmly, explaining that we weren't together, that we hadn't been for months, and that her behavior was scaring me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. But then her expression hardened, and she accused me of trying to abandon her, of breaking her heart all over again. As her voice rose, heads turned in our direction. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, judging me, probably thinking I was the bad guy in this situation. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she loudly proclaimed her love for me, begging me not to leave her. In that moment, I realized this wasn't going to end easily. Laura wasn't just delusional. She was desperate and potentially dangerous. I knew I needed help, but I wasn't sure where to turn. The police, a therapist, her family. As I stood there, frozen in indecision, Laura's demeanor suddenly changed. The tears disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent a cold tingle down my spine. She leaned in close and whispered, "If I can't have you, no one will." With those words, she turned and walked out of the bar, leaving me standing there, surrounded by confused friends and feeling more alone than ever. I knew this was far from over. In fact, I had a sinking feeling that the real nightmare was just beginning. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. After my breakup with Ashley, I was a complete mess. Our relationship had been toxic for months, filled with constant arguments and trust issues. Even though I knew ending it was the right decision, it still left me feeling hollow and lost. I threw myself into work trying to forget the pain and rebuild my life. For weeks, I barely left my apartment except to go to the office, existing in a fog of grief and regret. Then, like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds, I met Sarah. She was different from anyone I'd ever known, kind, patient, and understanding in a way that made my walls start to crumble. We met at a coffee shop near my office. I was there trying to shake off my usual post-work funk when she accidentally bumped into me, spilling her latte all over my shirt. Instead of getting angry, I found myself laughing for the first time in months. Sarah was mortified, insisting on buying me a new coffee and shirt. We ended up talking for hours, long after the coffee shop closed. We started slow, just casual coffee dates at first. I was hesitant to open up, scared of getting hurt again. But Sarah made it easy. She never pushed, just listened when I was ready to share. For the first time in ages, I felt hopeful about love again. Our coffee dates turned into dinner dates, then weekends spent exploring the city together. Sarah brought color back into my world, reminding me how to laugh and enjoy life again. Things were going great with Sarah. We'd been dating for a few months, and I was happier than I'd been in years. We just started talking about moving in together, planning our future. It started small, so subtle I almost didn't notice at first. Sarah mentioned getting some weird messages on social media from accounts she didn't recognize. Nothing too alarming, just odd comments about her appearance or vague questions about our relationship. We brushed it off as internet trolls, maybe some bored teenagers with nothing better to do. Sarah blocked the accounts, and we didn't think much more about it. I wish I'd paid more attention, seen the red flags for what they were. But it escalated quickly, far beyond what we could have imagined. Sarah started finding notes left on her car windshield or slipped under her office door. They were vague but deeply unsettling. Things like, "He'll hurt you too," or "You don't know the real Chris." The handwriting was always different, as if someone was trying to disguise their identity. Sarah was freaked out, understandably. She'd come home shaken, showing me the latest note with trembling hands. I assured her it was probably just a prank, maybe a jealous coworker, but deep down I had a sinking feeling I knew who was behind it. I just couldn't bring myself to believe Ashley would go this far. I hadn't heard from Ashley since our breakup. The last time we spoke, she'd screamed that she never wanted to see me again. I thought she'd moved on like I had, maybe found someone new. I even felt guilty sometimes knowing she was happy. Clearly, I was wrong. So terribly, dangerously wrong. Sarah kept getting more harassing messages online. Fake profiles popped up faster than we could block them, spreading vicious lies about me. Posts claiming I was abusive, unfaithful, manipulative. That I had a secret family or was involved in illegal activities. It was all completely false, but the sheer volume of it was overwhelming. Sarah tried to ignore it, telling me she knew it wasn't true. But I could see the doubt starting to creep into her eyes. She'd hesitate sometimes before taking my hand, or look at me searchingly when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It broke my heart to see the trust we built slowly eroding. Then Ashley took it to another level, crossing a line I never thought she'd dare. She somehow got Sarah's personal cell phone number and started texting her, pretending to be an old friend of mine. She'd share little tidbits about our relationship, twisting everything to make me look like a monster. She'd say things like, "I'm just worried about you. Chris has a history of cheating," or "He seems sweet now, but he has a temper. I've seen him put his fist through a wall." It was all lies, but mixed with just enough truth to be believable. Ashley knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt, using her intimate knowledge of our past against me. I was furious when I found out. I wanted to confront Ashley to put an end to this madness once and for all. But Sarah begged me not to. She was scared it would only make things worse, that Ashley might escalate even further. So I felt helpless watching the woman I cared about slowly pull away because of lies and manipulation. I'd reach her at night and feel her tense up, as if expecting violence. The pain in her eyes when she looked at me was unbearable. I felt like I was losing her, powerless to stop it. Sarah tried to stay strong, to believe in me and our relationship. But I could see the constant harassment taking its toll. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights. She'd jump at every text notification, panic flashing across her face before she checked the sender. She'd ask probing questions about my past, clearly trying to verify Ashley's claims without directly accusing me. It was like walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger her fears. I did everything I could to reassure Sarah, to prove Ashley's claims were false. I was completely open with her, showing her my phone and an email to prove I had nothing to hide. I introduced her to my friends and family so she could see for herself what kind of person I really was. They all adored Sarah, welcoming her with open arms. For a while, it seemed to help. Sarah would relax around them, some of her old spark returning. But as soon as we were alone, the doubts would creep back in. But Ashley was relentless, always finding new ways to torment us. She'd show up at Sarah's favorite coffee shop or gym, pretending it was a coincidence. She'd strike up conversations, playing the concerned ex who just wanted to warn Sarah about me. She'd leave photos from our relationship where Sarah would find them, always shots taken out of context to look suspicious. It was maddening knowing she was poisoning Sarah's mind, and I couldn't stop it. I felt like I was going crazy, seeing Ashley's influence everywhere, but unable to prove it was her. The final straw came when Ashley crossed a line that chilled me to my core. She broke into Sarah's apartment while we were out. She didn't steal anything valuable, just left subtle signs she'd been there. A moved picture frame, Sarah's clothes slightly rearranged, a lipstick smudge on a wine glass we knew wasn't there before. It was a power play, letting Sarah know she wasn't safe even in her own home. When we got back and Sarah realized what had happened, she completely broke down. She curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her, feeling utterly helpless and more afraid than I'd ever been in my life. I knew I had to do something drastic to end this nightmare. I reached out to Ashley directly, swallowing my pride and begging her to stop. I offered her money, anything to make her leave us alone. She laughed in my face, a cold, empty sound that sent chills down my spine. This wasn't about me anymore. She wanted to destroy Sarah completely to prove that no one else could have me. I realized then how truly unhinged Ashley had become. This wasn't just a jealous ex acting out. She was dangerous, possibly capable of anything. Slowly, painfully, things started to calm down. Ashley's harassment lessened as it got harder for her to reach us. Sarah began to relax again, to trust me. We grew closer to the ordeal, our bond strengthened by what we faced together. We started to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was finally over. I never imagined a simple breakup could turn my life into a living nightmare. Katie and I had been together for 2 years, but things weren't working out. We'd grown apart and wanted different things. When I finally worked up the courage to end it, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Katie seemed to take it well, even agreeing it was for the best. We promised to stay friends, and I thought that was that. I was ready to move on, focus on my career, maybe even start dating again. Little did I know, he had other plans. Plans that would shatter my world and leave me questioning everything and everyone around me. It started small. A few weeks after the breakup, I noticed Katie posting cryptic messages on social media. Vague comments about healing and surviving. I didn't think much of it at first. Breakups are tough, and everyone copes differently. But then mutual friends started acting weird around me. They'd go quiet when I approached or give me strange looks. I brushed it off as post-breakup awkwardness. I was wrong. The hammer fell on a Tuesday. I was at work, buried in a project, when my phone rang. It was the local police department, asking me to come in for questioning. My heart raced as I agreed, racking my brain for what this could be about. A speeding ticket I had forgotten. Some misunderstanding. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear. At the station, a stern-faced detective sat me down. She started asking about my relationship with Katie, our breakup, if we had any recent contact. Then she dropped the bomb. Katie had filed a report claiming I'd assaulted her just before our breakup. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Assaulted her? I'd never laid a hand on Katie or any woman. This had to be a mistake. But as the detective continued, showing me evidence Katie had provided, I realized this was no mistake. This was a carefully orchestrated plan. There were text messages, supposedly from me, threatening Katie. Screenshots of emails where I apologized for hurting her. Photos of bruises on her arms and face that she claimed I'd caused. It was all lies, all fabricated, but it looked real. Too real. I denied everything, of course. Offered to show them my real phone, my real emails. But the detective's face told me she'd already made up her mind. In her eyes, I was just another abuser trying to wiggle out of consequences. She told me they'd be in touch, but advised me to get a lawyer. I left the station in a daze, my mind reeling. That night was the beginning of the end of my old life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept going over every interaction Katie and I had ever had, wondering how she could do this. Had I missed some signs? Was she really this vindictive, or was something else going on? I tried calling her, but her number was blocked. I thought about going to her place, but knew that would only make things worse. The next few days were a blur. I got a lawyer, tried to gather evidence to prove my innocence, but it felt like swimming against a tidal wave. Katie had told everyone her version of events before I even knew what was happening. My phone was flooded with angry messages from her friends, even my family. People I'd known for years were calling me a monster, telling me to turn myself in. Work found out about the investigation and put me on leave. My boss said it was just a precaution, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. He'd met Katie at company events, liked her. Now he was probably wondering if he really knew me at all. I was losing everything, and the investigation had barely started. As weeks turned into months, my life became unrecognizable. I lost my job. Even without charges, the company didn't want the association. Most of my friends disappeared, either believing Katie or not wanting to take sides. My family was torn apart. My parents wanted to believe me, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. My sister flat out told me she believed Katie. Christmas that year was a tense, silent affair. The worst part was the constant fear. Every time my phone rang, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Was this it? Were they coming to arrest me? I started having panic attacks, something I'd never experienced before. I couldn't go out in public without feeling like everyone was staring, judging. One time, I saw Katie at the grocery store. She flinched dramatically when she saw me, drawing attention from other shoppers. But as I hurried past, I caught her eye. She was smiling. That's when I realized the full extent of what I was dealing with. Katie didn't want justice. She didn't even really want me arrested. That would end her game too quickly. No, Katie wanted to destroy me, to dismantle my life piece by piece, and she was succeeding. I sank into a deep depression. Some days I could barely get out of bed. What was the point? My life as I knew it was over. I'd lost my job, my friends, my reputation. Even if I was cleared, how could I ever rebuild? The doubt would always be there. I started having dark thoughts, wondering if everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. But then, a glimmer of hope. A mutual friend reached out, someone who'd been silent since the accusation started. She'd been talking to Katie, and things weren't adding up. Katie's story kept changing, growing more elaborate with each telling. Our friend started to suspect Katie was lying and decided to dig deeper. Over the next few weeks, cracks began to appear in Katie's story. The friend found out Katie had been using an app to create fake text conversations. She'd asked several people to lie about witnessing the abuse, but they'd refused. The photos of her bruises, makeup, and old pictures from when she'd fallen during a hike were purposed to fit her story. As the truth came out, the tide began to turn. The police reopened the investigation, this time looking at Katie. Former friends reached out to apologize. My family rallied around me, but the damage was done. I'd lost months of my life, my job, my sense of security. The person I was before all this was gone. Katie, faced with mounting evidence of her deception, finally broke. She admitted to making it all up, claiming she'd had a mental breakdown after our breakup. She was charged with filing a false report and defamation. I thought I'd feel relief or satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. Now I'm trying to rebuild. I've moved to a new city, started a new job. On the surface, things are getting better, but inside, I'm changed. I flinch at unexpected touches. I save every text conversation, every email, paranoid about future accusations. Dating feels impossible. How can I trust anyone after this? The legal battle with Katie continues. She's facing charges and I'm suing for damages, but it's not about money. I want there to be consequences, a deterrent for anyone else who might think of doing something like this. False accusations don't just hurt the accused, they hurt real victims, make it harder for them to be believed. I thought I was finally free. The day I walked away from Jake, I felt I could breathe again. Our relationship had been suffocating, his need for control crushing me slowly. But as I soon learned, leaving Jake wasn't the end of my nightmare. It was just the beginning. At first, it was easy to brush off the little things. A flash of the silver Accord in my rearview mirror as I drove to work. His silhouette, unmistakable even from a distance, lurking near the entrance of my favorite coffee shop. I told myself I was being paranoid, that these were just coincidences in our small town. But as days turned to weeks, the coincidences started piling up, and a familiar dread began to creep back into my life. Jake's car seemed to materialize everywhere I went. I'd spot it in the grocery store parking lot, engine still warm, even though I never saw him inside. It would be parked across the street from my gym, just out of sight unless you knew where to look. Most unsettling of all, I began noticing it late at night, tucked away in the shadows down the street from my new apartment. Each sighting set my heart racing, a toxic mix of fear and anger churning in my gut. I started taking different routes home, varying my schedule, anything to shake the feeling of being watched. But no matter what I did, Jake always seemed to be one step ahead. I tried to rationalize it all away. Maybe Jake just happened to shop at the same stores, work out at the same times. Maybe it wasn't even his car I was seeing. Silver Accords are common enough after all. But deep down I knew better. The prickle on the back of my neck when I felt eyes on me. The way my stomach dropped every time I glimpsed that familiar license plate. My body knew the truth even when my mind wanted to deny it. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was having dinner with Mark, my new boyfriend, at a cozy Italian place across town. As we were leaving, Mark casually mentioned feeling like he was being followed lately. My blood ran cold as he described a silver car that had been tailing him, always keeping its distance but unmistakably there. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Jake wasn't just stalking me. He was targeting Mark too, seeing him as a threat to whatever twisted fantasy he was living in. Fury overrode my fear. The next day, I confronted Jake outside his workplace demanding answers. He played it cool, all innocent smiles and concerned eyes. He claimed he was just worried about me, wanted to make sure I was safe in my new life. But I could see the calculation behind his act, the way his eyes darted around, looking for witnesses or escape routes. I didn't buy his concerned ex-boyfriend routine for a second. From that point on, Jake's behavior escalated rapidly. Notes started appearing on my windshield, filled with cryptic messages that ranged from pleading to vaguely threatening. "We belong together," one read. "I'm the only one who can keep you safe," said another. The most chilling simply stated, "I'm always watching." I started photographing each note before destroying it, building a digital record of Jake's obsession. He began showing up at my workplace, chatting with my coworkers as if nothing was amiss. He asked about me, spinning tales about how worried he was, how I'd been unstable lately. To my horror, I realized some of my colleagues were buying into his act. Whispers and concerned glances followed me through the office. My friends, too, began to doubt me, swayed by Jake's charming demeanor and seemingly genuine concern. I felt like I was going crazy. No one seemed to fully believe me, not even police. I filed reports, showed them the notes, begged them to do something. But Jake was always one step ahead, covering his tracks and playing the concerned ex-boyfriend to perfection. Without concrete proof, there was little they could do. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if maybe I really was overreacting. The constant stress and paranoia were taking their toll, leaving me exhausted and on edge. But then came the night that changed everything. I returned home late from work, my arms full of groceries, to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart pounding, I stepped inside, half expecting to find the place ransacked. Instead, I found Jake sitting calmly on my couch, a eerily serene smile on his face. He claimed he was there to protect me, that he'd sensed I was in danger and couldn't bear the thought of something happening to me. As he spoke, my fear crystallized into white-hot rage. I realized the full extent of his delusion, how far he was willing to go to maintain control over me. In that moment, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't rely on others to believe me or Kiwi safe. It was time to turn the tables on Jake and show him I wasn't the helpless victim he thought I was. As calmly as I could, I asked Jake to leave, telling him I appreciated his concern but needed space. He left without argument, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. The final confrontation came on a stormy night, rain lashing against my windows as thunder rumbled overhead. I'd been on edge all day, a sixth sense telling me something was about to happen. When I heard the soft click of my lock being picked, I was ready. I watched through my hidden cameras as Jake slipped inside, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. He made his way to my bedroom, where he began arranging a disturbing shrine-like display on my dresser. Photos of us together, trinkets from our relationship, even items I thought I'd lost, all laid out with obsessive precision. As he worked, I could see the madness in his eyes, the complete disconnect from reality. My heart pounding, I silently dialed 911 and left the line open. Then, armed with a taser and my newfound strength, I confronted Jake. The look of shock on his face when he realized I'd known he was there all along was almost satisfying. For a moment, he tried to maintain his act, sputtering excuses about protecting me. But as I laid out everything I knew, every piece of evidence I gathered, I watched his facade crumble. Jake's expression morphed from shock to anger to a kind of manic desperation. He lunged at me, but I was ready. The self-defense classes kicked in, and I managed to evade his grasp. We grappled in the darkness, the storm outside matching the chaos within. Just as I felt my strength beginning to falter, the room exploded with light and sound as the police burst in. In the aftermath, as Jake was led away in handcuffs, I felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also lingering fear and a strange sense of loss. The Jake I once cared for was long gone, replaced by this obsessive stranger. Tom and I had been together for 2 years, a relationship that started with butterflies and ended in a nightmare. At first, his attentiveness seemed sweet, but as time went on, his jealousy and need for control became suffocating. When I finally gathered the courage to end things, I thought it would be the start of a new chapter. Instead, it was the beginning of a horror story I never saw coming. The first week after the breakup was quiet, almost eerily so. I remember feeling relieved, thinking we'd both move on peacefully. But that silence was just a calm before the storm. It started with a single text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this," it said. I brushed it off as a wrong number, but deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. Over the next few days, more messages trickled in, each from a different number, each more unsettling than the last. They were filled with insults, threats, and disturbing details about my daily routine. I started to feel watched, paranoid. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder on my way to work, scanning faces in the crowd for Tom's. The constant buzzing of my phone became a source of anxiety. I'd jump every time it went off, dreading what new horrors awaited me. At first, I didn't connect these messages to Tom. He'd always been so careful about his public image, always the perfect gentleman in front of others. I told myself it was just random harassment, maybe someone who had gotten my number by mistake. I blocked number after number, but new ones kept appearing. It felt like fighting a hydra. Off one head, and two more would grow in its place. The moment I knew it was Tom came like a slap in the face. One message mentioned a private joke from our third date, something only he could know. It was a reference to a clumsy waiter who had spilled wine all over Tom's new shirt, and how we'd laughed about it for weeks after. Seeing that memory twisted into something sinister made my blood run cold. The realization that Tom was behind all this hit me like a physical blow. I remember sitting at my bed, phone in hand, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. With this new knowledge came a wave of fear unlike anything I'd experienced before. Tom wasn't just an ex who couldn't let go. He was actively trying to destroy my life. The messages took on a new, more terrifying meaning. Every threat now felt real, every insult a promise of worse to come. I started to see Tom's influence everywhere, jumping at shadows and doubting even my closest friends. The harassment didn't stop at messages. Soon, I noticed whispers following me at work. Colleagues who used to chat with me by the water cooler now averted their eyes. I caught snippets of conversations that made my stomach churn. Rumors about me being unreliable, untrustworthy, even unstable. Someone was poisoning my professional reputation, and I had a sickening feeling I knew who it was. My family wasn't spared either. My mom called one evening, her voice laced with worry. She asked if I was in some kind of trouble, mentioning that Tom had reached out to her. He had expressed concern about my behavior, painting himself as a caring ex-boyfriend and me as someone spiraling out of control. I tried to explain the truth, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Tom had gotten to her first, planting seeds of distrust that I struggled to uproot. The final blow came when my boss called me into her office. The look on her face as I entered made my heart sink. She seemed uncomfortable, almost afraid to meet my eyes. That's when she showed me the emails. A series of anonymous messages claiming I was involved in criminal activities. They were detailed enough to seem credible, vague enough to be hard to disprove. I watched as everything I had worked for my entire career teetered on the brink of destruction. Trying to prove Tom was behind all this felt like screaming into a void. He was careful, never leaving any trace that could definitively link him to the harassment. When I ran into him in public, he was a picture of innocence, calm, collected, even concerned about how stressed I looked. It was a masterful performance, one that had everyone fooled. No one believed me when I suggested Tom might be the culprit. But he seems so nice, they'd say, or he's always so put together. The disconnect between the Tom they saw and the one I knew was maddening. I felt like I was losing my mind. doubting my own experiences in the face of his carefully crafted public persona. The constant stress began to take its toll. I lost weight, my hair started falling out in clumps, and I developed persistent headaches that no amount of painkillers could touch. Sleep became a distant memory. I'd lie awake at night, jumping at every sound, convinced Tom was somehow watching me. Even in my own home, I didn't feel safe. I tried everything I could think of to escape the harassment. I changed my phone number, but somehow he always found a way to reach me. I considered moving, but the thought of uprooting my entire life because of him filled me with a mixture of fear and rage. Why should I have to run? This was my life he was trying to destroy. Friends noticed a change in me, but I was afraid to confide in anyone fully. The paranoia had set in deep. What if Tom got to them too? What if they were already reporting back to him? I began to isolate myself, turning down invitations and avoiding social gatherings. The loneliness was crushing, but it felt safer than the alternative. Months passed, and the harassment showed no signs of stopping. It ebbed and flowed, sometimes quieting down enough to let me think it might be over, only to come roaring back worse than before. Each time I started to feel hopeful, a new wave of messages or rumors would wash over me, drowning me in fear and anxiety all over again. In desperation, I went to the police, but without concrete evidence linking Tom to the harassment, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I document everything, which I started doing obsessively. Every message, every rumor, every strange occurrence. I wrote it all down, hoping to find a pattern or a slip-up I could use. My apartment became a war room, walls covered in notes and timelines, as I tried to make sense of the chaos Tom had unleashed on my life. It was during this dark time that I started seeing a therapist. At first, I was hesitant to open up, afraid that somehow Tom would find out and use it against me. But slowly, I began to trust her. She helped me develop coping strategies for the anxiety and stress, teaching me breathing exercises and grounding techniques that became lifelines in my worst moments. My therapist also suggested I reach out to domestic violence support groups. Even though Tom and I were no longer together, the pattern of control and manipulation was clear. It was in one of these groups that I finally found people who understood what I was going through. Hearing their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others who had faced similar situations and come out the other side. Building a case against Tom was a slow, painstaking process. We gathered evidence, documented patterns, and slowly built a picture of the harassment I'd been enduring. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. But with each piece of evidence we collected, I felt stronger. The constant fear began to subside, replaced by a steely determination. I wasn't going to let Tom destroy my life. As we worked on the legal case, I also focused on rebuilding my life. I reached out to friends I had pushed away, explaining as much as I felt comfortable sharing. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, but others grew stronger. Slowly, my support network began to reform. At work, things started to improve as well. As time passed and the rumored behavior Tom had described never materialized, colleagues began to doubt the whispers. My consistently good work spoke louder than any rumor. My boss, who had once looked at me with suspicion, now became one of my strongest advocates. It's been a year since the breakup now, and while things aren't perfect, they're better. The harassment has decreased, though it hasn't stopped entirely. We're close to having enough evidence to take legal action against Tom, a prospect that fills me with both anticipation and dread. The thought of facing him in court is terrifying, but the idea of finally holding him accountable gives me strength. I never imagined I'd be the one with a crazy ex story. Those tales you hear about and think, that could never happen to me. But here I am, living through my own personal nightmare. It all started on a rainy Tuesday evening when I stumbled upon a text message that would change my life forever. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through Chris' phone while he was in the shower. We'd been together for 3 years, and I never had a reason to doubt him until that moment. A message from someone named Sarah popped up, and curiosity got the better of me. As I read through their conversation, my heart sank. The flirty exchanges, the secret meetups, the promises of next time, it was all there in black and white. My world came crashing down around me. When Chris came out of the shower, I confronted him. At first, he tried to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. He broke down, confessing to a months-long affair with a coworker. I was devastated, angry, and heartbroken all at once. Without hesitation, I told him it was over. I grabbed my things and walked out, ignoring his pleas and promises to change. The first few days after the breakup were a blur of tears and ice cream. I crashed at my best friend's place, unable to face going back to the apartment Chris and I had shared. I thought the worst was behind me, that I could start healing and moving on. Little did I know the real nightmare was just beginning. It started with the calls and texts. At first, they were apologetic, begging me to reconsider. Chris promised he'd change, that he'd do anything to make it right. I ignored them, determined to stay strong. But as the days went by, the messages became more frequent and increasingly desperate. My phone would buzz constantly, day and night. I'd wake up to dozens of missed calls and voicemails. When I didn't respond, Chris started showing up at my workplace. The first time, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw him standing outside the building. He waved, a sad smile on his face, and I quickly ducked inside. I told myself it was a coincidence, that maybe he was just in the area. But then it happened again the next day and the day after that. He'd stand there staring at me through the window, sometimes for hours. My coworkers started to notice, whispering and giving me concerned looks. I felt so embarrassed and uncomfortable, constantly on edge wondering when he'd appear next. I tried talking to my boss about it, but there wasn't much she could do if he wasn't actually coming into the building. Things escalated when Chris began reaching out to my friends and family. He'd send them long messages on social media, explaining his side of the story. He painted himself as the victim, claiming I was overreacting to a simple mistake. Some of my friends, who only knew Chris as the charming guy I've been dating, started to question my decision. They'd tell me I was being too harsh, that everyone deserves a second chance. Even my own family wasn't immune to his manipulation. My mom called me one day, asking if I was sure I wanted to throw away a 3-year relationship over one little indiscretion. I felt betrayed and alone, like no one understood what I was going through. It was as if Chris had managed to turn everyone against me, making me doubt my own feelings and decisions. I couldn't escape him. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of him at the grocery store, at the gym, even at my favorite coffee shop. It was like he had a sixth sense for knowing where I'd be. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to work, and avoiding my usual hangout spots. But somehow, he always seemed to find me. One evening, I was out with some friends at a local restaurant. We were having a good time, and for a moment, I felt like things were getting back to normal. That's when I saw him. Chris was sitting at the bar, pretending to be engrossed in his phone. My heart started racing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I made an excuse to leave early, practically running out of the restaurant. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every little noise made me jump, convinced Chris was somehow outside my window. I started to question everything. Was I overreacting? Maybe I should just talk to him, hear him out. But then I remember the pain of his betrayal, the weeks of harassment, and I knew I had to stay strong. The next morning, I woke up to find my car had been keyed. Long, deep scratches ran along both sides. There was no proof it was Chris, but in my gut, I knew it was him. The thought of him being right outside my home while I slept made me feel violated and terrified. I called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. My friends tried to be supportive, but I could tell some of them thought I was being paranoid. They didn't understand the constant fear, the feeling of being watched and hunted. Things came to a head when Chris showed up at my sister's wedding. I hadn't told him about it, so he must have found out through social media or mutual friends. He acted like everything was normal, chatting with my family members as if we were still together. I felt sick to my stomach watching him charm everyone while I stood there, frozen in disbelief. My sister, always my fiercest protector, noticed something was wrong. When I told her what had been happening, she was furious. Without hesitation, she marched up to Chris and told him to leave. It was a scene with raised voices and shocked guests. But in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Finally, someone was standing up for me. After the wedding incident, I decided enough was enough. I gathered all the evidence I could. Screenshots of messages, security camera footage from my apartment building, witness statements from coworkers, and filed for a restraining order. The process was long and stressful, reliving every moment of harassment in excruciating detail. But finally, the court granted the order. For a while, things seemed to calm down. Chris stopped showing up at my work and contacting my friends. I started to feel like I could breathe again, like maybe this nightmare was finally over. I even went on a few dates, tentatively dipping my toes back into the world of romance. But just when I thought I was free, the anonymous letters started arriving. There was no return address, but I knew they were from him. The handwriting, the turns of phrase, it was unmistakably Chris. The letters were a disturbing mix of apologies, declarations of love, angry accusations, and veiled threats. Each one left me feeling sick and scared. Just when I thought I had finally put the whole ordeal behind me, something happened that made me realize this nightmare was far from over. I came home one evening to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart pounding, I cautiously pushed it open. Everything looked normal at first glance, but then I noticed it. A single red rose on my pillow with a note that simply read, "I'll never let you go." The police came, but once again there was no concrete evidence it was Chris. They suggested I move, change my name, start fresh somewhere new. But as I stood there in my violated home, a strange calm came over me. I was done running, done being afraid. Whenever Chris had planned, I would face it head on. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me. My name's Ethan, and this is how my life turned into a living nightmare. It all started on a crisp autumn evening. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the warm aroma of espresso filling the air, when Lily walked in. She had this radiant smile that lit up the whole room. We locked eyes, and I felt an instant connection. Little did I know that moment would be the beginning of the most terrifying experience of my life. Our relationship started like a fairy tale. Lily was attentive, caring, and always eager to spend time together. We go on spontaneous road trips, stay up all night talking about our dreams, and surprised each other with thoughtful gifts. I felt like I'd found my soulmate. But as the months went by, I started to notice small changes in Lily's behavior. At first, it was subtle. She'd text me constantly throughout the day, wanting to know where I was and who I was with. I brushed it off as her being affectionate. Then she started showing up unexpectedly at my workplace, bringing me lunch or coffee. It was sweet at first, but it quickly became uncomfortable. My coworkers would give me odd looks, and I could sense their discomfort. As time went on, Lily's behavior became more controlling. She'd get upset if I wanted to hang out with my friends without her. She'd accuse me of cheating if I took too long to respond to her messages. I caught her going through my phone multiple times, reading my texts and emails. The woman I fell in love with was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized. After a year of this, I knew I had to end it. The constant anxiety and stress were taking a toll on my mental health. I dreaded going home, knowing I have to face Lily's interrogations about my day. I missed the freedom of being able to live my life without constantly worrying about someone's approval. The breakup conversation was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Lily cried, screamed, and begged me to reconsider. She promised she'd change, that things would be different. But I knew in my heart that it was over. I left her apartment that night feeling a mix of relief and guilt, hoping that we could both move on and heal. For a few days, everything seemed normal. I was sad about the breakup, but I also felt like I could breathe again. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months, focusing on my hobbies and just enjoying my newfound freedom. But that peace didn't last long. It started with a text. "I miss you," it said. Simple enough, but something about it made my skin crawl. I didn't respond, hoping Lily would get the message, but the texts kept coming, growing more frequent and more desperate. "We're meant to be together. I can't live without you. You'll see that we're perfect for each other." Then I started noticing her everywhere. At the grocery store, at the gym, at my favorite coffee shop. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. After all, we lived in the same city, but the frequency was unsettling. One day, I saw her outside my office building. She waved at me like it was perfectly normal for her to be there. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a clean break. The gifts started arriving at my door. Little things at first. A book she knew I wanted, my favorite snacks, a mixtape of songs that were special to us. The notes attached always said something about our undying love and how we'd be together again soon. I tried to return them, but Lily would just send more. My friends started to notice something was off. They told me Lily had been asking them about me, wanting to know what I was up to, who I was seeing. Some of them felt uncomfortable and started to distance themselves. I felt isolated, like Lily was slowly cutting off all my connections to the outside world. One night, I came home late from work, exhausted and looking forward to some peace and quiet. As soon as I opened my apartment door, I knew something was wrong. There was a faint smell of Lily's perfume in the air. My heart started racing as I moved through the apartment, checking each room. And there she was, sitting on my couch, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was in shock. How did she get in? She must have made a copy of my keys at some point without me knowing. I asked her to leave, trying to stay calm despite the panic rising in my chest. She just kept smiling, saying she knew I'd come around eventually, that we were meant to be together. It took everything in me to keep my composure as I firmly asked her to leave. She finally did, but not before telling me that we'd be together again soon. I changed my locks the next day, but it didn't help much. Lily always seemed to find a way to get to me. She started showing up at places where she knew I'd be. If I was out with friends, she'd suddenly appear at the same restaurant or bar. My friends became increasingly uncomfortable, making excuses not to hang out as much. I felt like I was losing everyone in my life. When I finally worked up the courage to go on a date with someone new, Lily somehow found out. She showed up at the restaurant, making a scene and embarrassing me in front of everyone. My date was understanding, but she didn't want to see me again after that. I couldn't blame her. Work became a nightmare, too. Lily would send me dozens of messages throughout the day. Sometimes she'd call my office, pretending to be a client. My boss started to notice that something was off with me. I was constantly distracted, always on edge. My performance was slipping, and I was terrified of losing my job. I tried talking to Lily's friends and family, hoping they could help, but she'd already gotten to them, telling them I was the one who couldn't let go. They thought I was a problem. I felt like I was going crazy, like no one would believe what was really happening. Things came to a head when I came home one day to find my apartment trash. Pictures of Lily and me were everywhere. She'd written "For a year" in red all over my walls. It was like something out of a horror movie. I called the police, but Lily was long gone by the time they arrived. They took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt helpless and alone. I started to withdraw from everyone and everything. It was easier to just stay home than to deal with Lily popping up everywhere. My friends stopped calling. I was alone, exactly how Lily wanted me. I could feel myself slipping into depression, but I didn't know how to be out of this situation. But then something changed. One night, as I sat in my dark apartment, afraid to even turn on the lights, I had a moment of clarity. I realized that by isolating myself, I was letting Lily win. I was giving her exactly what she wanted, control over my life. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I reached out to a friend I hadn't spoken to in months, pouring out everything that had happened. To my surprise and relief, he believed me. He helped me contact a lawyer and a therapist specializing in stalking cases. One moment, I was Michael, a regular guy with a stable job and a normal social life. The next, I was thrust into a nightmare, my world crumbling around me, all because of a vengeful ex-girlfriend's lies. It started on a crisp autumn evening. I was at a local bar with friends, celebrating a coworker's promotion. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. That's when I saw her, Katie. My ex. We'd broken up 2 months ago, and I thought we were both moving on. But the look in her eyes when she spotted me sent a chill down my spine. It was a mixture of hurt, anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something dangerous. I tried to brush off the encounter, convinced I was reading too much into it. Katie and I had dated for 2 years, and while the breakup hadn't been easy, I thought we'd ended things amicably. She seemed upset, but understanding when I explained that we'd grown apart. I was relieved to move on, ready to start a new chapter in my life. The weeks following our breakup were uneventful. I threw myself into work, picked up a new hobby, and spent time with friends. Life was getting back to normal, or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. I was at my desk, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Thinking it might be a client, I answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a detective. He wanted me to come down to the station for questioning. My heart raced as I asked why, but he was vague, saying only that it was about a recent complaint. I arrived at the police station, my palms sweaty and my mind racing. The detective led me to an interrogation room, its stark walls and fluorescent lighting adding to my growing anxiety. That's when he dropped the bomb. Katie had filed a report accusing me of assault. The room seemed to spin. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Me, an abuser. It was impossible. I'd never laid a hand on Katie or any woman. We had arguments, sure, but nothing physical. I vehemently denied the accusations, my voice shaking as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The detective's face remained impassive as he detailed Katie's claims. According to her, I'd been physically and emotionally abusive throughout our relationship. She described incidents of violence, providing dates and vivid details. As he spoke, I felt like I was listening to a story about someone else. None of it was true, but Katie had crafted a narrative so convincing, so detailed, that even I began to doubt my own memories. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmare only intensified. I learned that Katie hadn't just gone to the police. She'd told her friends, my friends, even my family. She painted a picture of me as a monster, a manipulative abuser who had terrorized her for years. The evidence she'd fabricated was shocking in its thoroughness. There were text messages that seemed to show me admitting guilt and apologizing for hurting her. Photos of bruises she claimed I'd inflicted. A journal detailing the alleged abuse. It was all fake, all manufactured, but it looked real. Too real. My life began to crumble around me. Friends I'd known for years now looked at me with suspicion and disgust. Invitations stopped coming. When I did go out, I could feel the stares and whispers. People I considered close friends now treated me like a pariah. Work became unbearable. Colleagues avoided me in the hallways. My boss called me in for a chat, suggesting I take some time off to deal with my personal issues. I knew what that really meant. They wanted me gone. The job I'd worked so hard for, the career I'd built, was slipping away. Even my family started to doubt me. My mom would call her voice strained, asking if maybe there was some truth to Katie's claims. Maybe I'd done something I didn't remember. My dad, always my staunchest supporter, now barely spoke to me. The distance in his voice when we did talk broke my heart. As the investigation dragged on, I hired a lawyer. It was expensive, draining my savings, but I had no choice. I needed someone on my side, someone to help me prove my innocence. But even with legal representation, I felt lost and alone. The worst part was knowing that Katie was lying. I couldn't understand why she was doing this. We hadn't had a terrible breakup. I tried to be kind and respectful. But now she was systematically destroying every aspect of my life. As weeks turned into months, I started to piece together what was really happening. Katie didn't want justice. She wanted revenge. She was angry about the breakup and determined to ruin my life for leaving her. The realization was chilling. How do you defend yourself against someone willing to go to such lengths? My life became a waking nightmare. I couldn't sleep, plagued by anxiety and fear. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. Every phone call, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Was this the moment they'd come to arrest me? I became a virtual prisoner in my own home, afraid to go out lest I run into someone who believed Katie's lies. My apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a cage. I spent hours poring over old emails and texts, desperately searching for anything that might prove my innocence. The investigation seemed never-ending. I was questioned multiple times by the police, each session more grueling than the last. I told the truth over and over, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They had Katie's evidence, her bruises, her tears. A word alone wasn't enough. My lawyer advised caution in everything I said and did. Anything could be used against me, he warned. This made me even more isolated. I couldn't talk to anyone about what was happening, couldn't defend myself or tell my side of the story. The loneliness was crushing. As time passed, I started to lose hope. Would this ever end? Would I ever be able to clear my name? Even if the charges were dropped, would people ever look at me the same way again? The future I'd planned for myself seemed impossible now. How could I move forward with this hanging over me? I thought about Katie constantly, trying to understand her motives. Did she realize the extent of the damage she was causing? Did she care? Or was her desire for revenge so all-consuming that nothing else mattered? The girl I thought I knew seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. A local news station picked up the story. Suddenly, my face was on TV, my name in the papers. The court of public opinion had found me guilty, and there seemed to be no way to change their minds. I hit rock bottom. Unemployed, isolated, and facing potential criminal charges, I couldn't see a way out. I considered leaving town, starting over somewhere new. But even that seemed impossible. How could I build a new life with this accusation following me? I'd never imagined my life would turn into a real-life horror story, but that's exactly what happened when I broke up with Hassan. We'd been together for just over a year, and at first, everything seemed perfect. He was attentive, caring, and always wanted to spend time with me. But as the months went by, I started to feel suffocated. Hassan's attention turned into constant surveillance, his care into control. Every decision I made, every place I went, every person I talked to, he wanted to know about it all. It was exhausting, and I felt I was losing myself. When I finally gathered the courage to end things, I expected some tears, maybe some angry texts, or a few awkward run-ins around town. What I got instead was a nightmare that would consume my entire life. The first week after the breakup was quiet. Too quiet looking back. I should have known it was a calm before the storm. It started innocently enough. I spotted Hassan at my favorite coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. He waved awkwardly from across the room, and I gave a polite nod before grabbing my lot and hurrying out. I chalked it up to an unfortunate coincidence and tried to put it out of my mind. But then I saw him again at the gym a few days later, and again at a friend's art show opening. Each time he'd act surprised to see me, claiming it was just chance that brought us to the same place. But as the coincidences piled up, a cold feeling of dread began to settle in my stomach. I started noticing him everywhere: the grocery store, the park where I jog, even outside my office building. It became clear that these weren't chance encounters. Hassan was following me. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe he was just having a hard time letting go and happened to be frequenting the same places. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The way his eyes followed me across a room, how he always seemed to know exactly where I'd be. It felt calculated and deeply unsettling. I started changing up my routine, taking different routes to work, and varying the times I left my apartment. But no matter what I did, Hassan always seemed to be one step ahead. Things escalated when I started getting strange messages on social media. Comments about my outfits or who I was with, proving Hassan had been watching me even when I couldn't see him. When I blocked him, the messages came through fake accounts instead. I changed my phone number, but somehow he got the new one within days. That's when the real fear set in. How was he doing this? How much did he know about my life? I felt like I was losing my mind, jumping at every sound and text notification. But my relief was short-lived. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. My heart sank as I read the words, "I'll always find you." I knew instantly it was from Hassan. My hands shook as I glanced out the window, half expecting to see him standing on the street below. The night was quiet and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I barely slept that night, jumping at every little noise and shadow. When morning finally came, I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted and on edge. As I opened my front door to leave for work, my foot hit something small on the doorstep. It was a package, no bigger than a paperback book. With trembling hands, I tore it open, my mind racing with possibilities of what could be inside. What I found made my blood run cold. It was a photo of me sleeping, clearly taken through my bedroom window just hours before. On the back, Hassan had scrawled a message: "Sweet dreams, my love. I'm always watching over you." That was my breaking point. I called in sick to work, threw some clothes in a bag, and fled to my parents' house in the suburbs. I felt like a teenager again, hiding in my childhood bedroom, but I was too scared to stay in my own home. I told my parents a vague story about a bad breakup and needing some space, not wanting to worry them with the full truth. But even at my parents' house, miles away from the city, Hassan's presence lingered. He somehow got my work address and sent a massive bouquet of roses, Odie's favorite flower, which he knew. He left voicemails from spoofed numbers, his voice alternating between sickly sweet and menacing. Somehow, he even knew about conversations I'd had in private with my family, proving that he was still monitoring me somehow. It felt like Hassan was everywhere and nowhere at once. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and second-guessing every interaction. Was that really just a random guy at the bus stop, or one of Hassan's friends keeping tabs on me? Could I trust my coworkers, or had he somehow gotten to them too? My world shrank as I withdrew from friends and activities, too afraid to go anywhere or do anything that might give Hassan an opportunity to find me. The constant stress took its toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety that had become my constant companion. Friends tried to help, but unless you've experienced this kind of relentless pursuit, it's hard to understand how it eats away at your sense of safety and sanity. I felt like I was trapped in a cage of Hassan's making, with no way out. That's when I decided I needed to disappear completely. With the help of domestic violence support group, I planned my escape. I quit my job, sold most of my possessions, and prepared to leave everything behind. The night before I was set to leave, I lay awake in bed, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Would this finally be the way to break free from Hassan's obsession? As dawn broke, I grabbed my packed bag and slipped out of the house. I was halfway down the driveway when a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. "Going somewhere, Lauren?" Hassan stepped out from behind a tree, a small smile playing on his lips. My blood ran cold as I realized he had been waiting for me, knowing somehow that I was planning to leave. As I stood frozen in fear, Hassan pulled out his phone and started scrolling through it casually. "You know, I've always admired your determination," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "But did you really think you could outsmart me? I know everything about you, Lauren. Every plan, every thought, every move you make." He turned the phone screen towards me, and I gasped in horror. On it was a live feed of my bedroom, the rumpled sheets still visible where I had been lying just minutes ago. Hassan had been watching me the entire time, right under my nose. "You see, my love," he continued, taking a step closer. "We're connected in ways you can't even imagine. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, I'll always be there. Because we belong together." As Hassan reached out to touch my face, I made a split-second decision. With all the strength I could muster, I swung my bag at his head, catching him off guard. As he stumbled, I turned and ran faster than I ever had in my life, my heart pounding in my ears.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.